The military dog hit the emergency room floor so hard the sound echoed across the lobby. 100 pounds of trained muscle collapsed onto the cold tiles. His back leg twisted beneath him. A deep, guttural cry tore from his chest. Not a bark, not a whine, something far worse. The sound of a warrior trying not to break. The emergency room at Riverside Memorial Hospital fell silent. Nurses stopped typing. Patients looked up. Even the phones seemed quieter. Beside the dog, a man in a worn military jacket dropped to one knee, one hand gripping the animal's shoulder. His face was pale, his jaw locked so tightly you could see the muscle working beneath the skin. He wasn't crying. He looked past crying. He looked like someone who had already survived things that should have destroyed him, and was now watching it happen again, under fluorescent lights on a cold Colorado night. The man's name was Ethan Walker, a former Army sergeant who had survived combat deployments, roadside explosions, and years of carrying memories he never spoke about. But none of that frightened him as much as the sight of the dog beside him. Because Rex wasn't just a dog. Rex had saved soldiers. He had found hidden explosives before they could kill. He had dragged wounded men to safety. He had stood between danger and the people he was trained to protect. Now he could barely lift his head. "I need help," Ethan said quietly. Nobody moved. Then one nurse stepped forward. Her name was Chloe Bennett. The supervisor's voice cut across the room immediately. "We don't treat animals here." But Chloe wasn't looking at her supervisor. She was looking at Rex, at the pain in his eyes, at the way he fought to stay alert despite the injury, at the silent bond between the wounded military dog and the veteran beside him. And in that moment, Chloe faced a choice that would cost her everything. She could follow hospital policy, or she could save a hero. What happened after that decision would bring military officers to the hospital, expose dangerous secrets, and uncover a corruption scandal far bigger than anyone could imagine. Before we continue, if you're the kind of person who stays until the end of a story, this one's for you. Leave a like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Let's begin. Cold rain swept across Cedar Falls, Colorado, tapping against the glass doors of Riverside Memorial Hospital, while the mountains beyond the city vanished under a black, moonless sky. By Chinza Bay that Tuesday night, Chloe Bennett had already learned that the world rarely gave warnings before it broke open. It simply cracked, quietly at first, then all at once. She stood behind the triage desk with a paper cup of coffee cooling beside her elbow, one hand resting on a patient chart, the other rubbing the faint ache at the base of her neck. She was 29 years old, though sleepless nights had carved a steadiness into her face that made some people think she was older. Chloe was not the kind of beautiful woman who demanded attention when she entered a room. Her beauty was quieter than that. She had soft brown eyes that noticed too much, dark chestnut hair usually twisted into a practical bun, light olive skin, and a small scar near her left eyebrow that most people never saw unless they stood close enough. She wore pale blue scrubs, white sneakers with worn soles, and a silver cross necklace tucked beneath her collar, not because she spoke often about faith, but because some things were easier to carry close to the heart than explain out loud. To the staff at Riverside Memorial, Chloe was efficient, polite, and distant. She remembered patients' allergies after hearing them once. She noticed when an elderly man's fingers trembled before his monitor changed. She could calm a frightened child without raising her voice. Yet in the break room, people described her with the same small phrases. Quiet, private, hard to read, probably hiding something. They were not entirely wrong. Chloe had a past she kept folded inside herself like an old letter, one she had read too many times and still could not throw away. Before she became an R nurse in Cedar Falls, she had spent years working in emergency response with military medical teams overseas, though she never offered that information unless paperwork required it. She had learned to treat wounds in places where the floor was dirt, the lights were flashlights, and the sound outside was never just thunder. She had learned that panic could spread faster than fire, that silence sometimes meant danger, and that loyalty, once earned, could hold a soul together when everything else failed. She had also learned that not every life she reached for could be saved. That lesson lived in her more deeply than any certification on her record. Riverside Memorial Hospital was a mid-size medical center built from gray stone, glass, and the kind of cheerful signage that tried too hard to make illness look manageable. It sat near the edge of Cedar Falls, where neighborhoods gave way to pine-covered foothills and long highways curled toward military training land farther west. The ER served farmers, truck drivers, college students, retired veterans, hikers, tourists, and anyone unlucky enough to meet black ice on a mountain road. On paper, it was a respected hospital. In reality, it was understaffed, overburdened, and held together each night by nurses who knew which supply drawers stuck, which monitors lied, and which doctors became dangerously slow when pride was involved. Chloe had worked there for 8 months. 8 months was long enough to know where the clean blankets were hidden, long enough to understand which supervisors cared about patients and which cared about reports, but not long enough to be protected. She was still considered relatively new, still watched, still quietly measured by people who had already decided she did not quite belong. The person watching her most closely that night was Linda Parker, the charge supervisor on duty. Linda was 47, tall and narrow-shouldered, with straight blonde hair cut at her jawline and eyes the color of winter steel. She dressed immaculately, even in scrubs, wore reading glasses on a chain, and carried herself like rules were sacred stones handed down from a mountain. Linda was not cruel in the loud way. She rarely shouted. Her disapproval arrived colder than shouting, polished and precise, like a blade cleaned before use. Years earlier, people said, she had been softer. Then a lawsuit involving an undocumented procedure had nearly ended her career. Since then, Linda worshipped policy with the devotion of a priest guarding a temple, and anyone who stepped outside the lines became a threat to her peace. Chloe understood that about her. She even pitied it sometimes. Fear could wear many uniforms. Bed 4 needs discharge papers, Linda said without looking up from the computer. Bed 6 is waiting on labs. Dr. Milton asked for a repeat blood pressure in 2. Dr. Alan Milton, the ER physician on that night, was a broad, tired man in his early 50s with graying curls, deep-set brown eyes, and a permanent frown that seemed less like anger than exhaustion. He had a good heart buried under too many malpractice seminars and too little sleep. Chloe nodded and moved. That was what she did. She moved. She checked the blood pressure of a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Evelyn Ross, a tiny 73-year-old woman with silver hair, soft wrinkled hands, and a surprising sense of humor. "Honey," Mrs. Ross whispered as Chloe tightened the cuff, "if my pressure is high, blame my son. He called to ask where I keep the Christmas ornaments. It's October." Chloe smiled despite herself. That would raise anyone's blood pressure. Mrs. Ross patted her wrist. "You've got kind eyes. Sad ones, but kind." Chloe looked down at the monitor before the words could settle too deeply. People like Mrs. Ross were dangerous in the gentlest way. They noticed the rooms inside you that you had forgotten to lock. Chloe finished the reading, adjusted the blanket, and returned to the desk. The night continued in its ordinary rhythm. A construction worker with a sliced palm, a teenager with an asthma flare, a drunk man arguing with a vending machine, a mother pacing with a feverish toddler pressed to her chest. Ordinary, Chloe had learned, was a fragile kingdom. It looked solid until something came through the doors and proved it had only been paper. At Chinza Bonmaba, the automatic doors opened, and the first thing Chloe heard was not a voice. It was a sound from the floor, deep and broken, a guttural cry that seemed to crawl through the room before the people who made it fully entered. Chloe's body reacted before her mind did. Her shoulders tightened. Her hand left the chart. Her eyes lifted. A German shepherd stumbled through the entrance and collapsed so hard, his shoulder struck the tile with a flat, terrible sound. He was enormous, close to 100 pounds, with a black saddle across his back, tan legs, a broad chest, and the unmistakable frame of a military working dog. His muzzle was dark, touched with gray around the edges, suggesting he was no puppy, perhaps 6 or 7 years old. His ears remained alert, even as his body betrayed him. His left rear leg twisted at an unnatural angle, and every breath came shallow and fast. Pain radiated from him like heat from a fire. Yet even on the floor, trembling, he scanned the room. That was what broke Chloe's heart first. Not the injury, not the blood smeared along one flank. The discipline, the brave, foolish, holy discipline of an animal, trained to protect even when he could no longer stand. Beside him fell a man in a warm brown military jacket. He dropped to one knee so quickly, it looked as if something inside him had been cut. He was in his late 30s, maybe 38, with a lean, weathered face, short dark hair damp from rain, a trimmed beard shadowing his jaw, and blue-gray eyes that had seen too much distance. His name, Chloe would soon learn, was Ethan Walker. He had the build of someone who had worked for strength rather than appearance. Broad shoulders, narrow hips, scarred knuckles, and a stiffness in his right leg that suggested an old injury never fully forgiven by the body. There was a faded army patch on his jacket, not decorative, not stolen for style. His left hand pressed against the dog's shoulder, while his right hovered helplessly over the injured hip, afraid to touch, afraid not to. He was not crying. Crying would have been easier to understand. Ethan looked beyond crying. His face held the terrible restraint of a man who had survived explosions, funerals, and the long war that continues after war, only to find himself kneeling under hospital lights begging strangers to save the one creature who had walked beside him through all of it. "Please," he said. His voice was low, controlled, and cracked at the edge. "His name is Rex. He's hurt bad. I need help." For 1 second, Riverside Memorial froze. Nurses stopped typing. A clerk behind registration lifted both hands from her keyboard. The drunk man near the vending machine stopped insulting the machine, perhaps sensing it was no longer the most dramatic thing in the room. Even Mrs. Ross leaned forward from her bed, her thin face suddenly serious. Linda Parker stepped out from behind the desk, her expression tightening before compassion could reach it. "Sir, this is a human emergency department." Ethan looked at her as if she had spoken from the far side of glass. "I know what kind of place this is. We don't treat animals here. He's not just an animal." Ethan's jaw flexed. "He's a retired military working dog. He served 2 deployments. He took an impact to the rear left side. I think the hip's out. He needs imaging, pain control, something." "There is an emergency veterinary clinic on Route 11, Linda said. 27 minutes away if the roads are clear." "They're not clear, and he won't make that ride without help." Rex made another sound then, lower than before, and his head dropped to the tile. It was not loud, but it struck Chloe like a bell. Her throat tightened. She had heard sounds like that in field clinics where dogs worked alongside soldiers, searching roads, guarding sleeping men, finding what human eyes missed. She had watched one Malinois refuse to leave his handler after a blast, even when his own paw was torn open. She had watched another dog rest his head on a medic's knee as if forgiving everyone for being unable to save him. Memory rose inside her, sharp and unwanted. Dust, heat. A tent wall snapping in wind. A handler whispering, "Stay with me, boy. Stay with me." Chloe closed her fingers around the edge of the desk until the present returned. "Sir," Linda continued, "I understand this is distressing, but hospital policy does not allow treatment of non-human patients." "Policy?" Ethan repeated. He did not shout. Somehow that made it worse. He found an explosive under a road in Kandahar before it killed 6 men. He pulled a corporal out of a collapsed doorway while rounds were still coming in. He has more courage than half the people who wrote your policy. Linda's face hardened, because pain had touched the one thing she trusted most. "I am sorry for his service, truly, but we cannot assume liability." Liability. Chloe hated the word in that moment. It was not that liability did not matter. It did. Rules existed for reasons. But sometimes words like liability stood in front of mercy wearing a respectable suit. Ethan looked around the room. "Is there anyone here who can at least look at him?" No one moved. Not because no one cared. Chloe saw care in their faces. Tanya Moore, a night nurse with copper skin, thick black curls pinned under a scrub cap, and a soft heart she tried to hide behind sarcasm, pressed her lips together. Dr. Milton stood at the far hallway, frozen between duty and caution. The registration clerk, a round-faced young man named Jeremy, looked close to tears. They all cared. But caring was easy when it cost nothing. Moving was different. Chloe moved. She did not remember deciding. One moment she was behind the desk, the next she was crossing the lobby with slow, careful steps. "Chloe," Linda said sharply. Chloe kept walking. She stopped several feet from Rex and crouched low, turning her body slightly sideways so she did not appear threatening. Rex's ears angled toward her. A rumble rolled in his chest. Not aggression, warning, pain, training. "Easy," Chloe murmured, not sweetly, not like someone speaking to a pet, but with the calm respect due a soldier who still had one last duty in him. "I'm not here to fight you." Ethan watched her, eyes narrowing with sudden attention. "You know working dogs." Chloe did not look away from Rex. A little. It was a lie shaped like modesty. She knew enough to understand that reaching too quickly could get her bitten, and that blaming the dog afterward would be a sin. She extended her hand low, palm down, not touching him. Rex sniffed the air. His nostrils flared, his eyes, dark and bright with pain, fixed on her face. Chloe waited. The whole ear seemed to wait with her. Somewhere a monitor beeped. Rain tapped the doors. Rex's rumble softened. After a long moment, he lowered his muzzle and touched her fingers once briefly. Permission. Chloe exhaled. Nurse Bennett, Linda said, her voice dangerous now. Step away from that dog. Chloe heard her. She also heard Rex's breathing, fast and shallow. She saw the angle of the leg, the tension through the flank, the way the muscles guarded the joint. She looked at Ethan. How long ago? Maybe 35 minutes. A vehicle clipped my truck near the north access road. Rex was thrown against the side panel. Chloe's eyes flicked up. You were hit? Rear quarter. Driver kept going. Any loss of consciousness for you? No. Chest pain? Trouble breathing? No. Forget me. Look at him. That answer told Chloe more about Ethan than any biography could. Men like him often treated their own bodies as inconvenient equipment. She gently placed her fingers along Rex's side, then near the hip. Rex flinched violently, teeth flashing for half a second, but he did not snap. Ethan put his forehead briefly against the dog's neck. Easy, Rex, she's helping. Chloe's hands moved with quiet precision. She felt heat, swelling, displacement. The joint was wrong, badly wrong. His hip is likely dislocated, she said. He needs sedation and reduction. Imaging first if possible. At minimum stabilization before transport. Linda stepped closer. You are not diagnosing an animal in my ER. Chloe looked up then. Her face was calm, but something in her eyes had changed. I am identifying an emergency. You are violating policy. He is in severe pain. He is not our patient. Chloe's voice lowered. Then let Mercy be our patient for 5 minutes. The word surprised even her. She was not usually poetic. She had no habit of making speeches. But sometimes the heart, when pressed hard enough, speaks in the language of old prayers. A few feet away, Mrs. Ross whispered, "Amen," from her bed, which would have been funny under different circumstances. Tanya glanced down to hide the corner of a smile. Linda did not smile. If you continue, I will call administration. Chloe reached for a trauma blanket from the lower shelf. Call whoever you need. She looked at Tanya, elastic bandage, rolled gauze, 2 towels. Tanya hesitated for only a second. She was 34, strong-bodied, warm-eyed, and tired of watching good nurses shrink under bad management. I'm handing supplies to a coworker, Tanya said loudly, pulling open a drawer. No idea what she does with them after that. Jeremy at registration made a tiny choking sound that might have been fear or laughter. Linda's eyes flashed. Tanya. Tanya set the supplies down within Chloe's reach. Oops! The humor was small, but in the tense room it landed like a candle lit in a storm. Chloe almost smiled. Almost. Then Rex shifted, and the smile disappeared. She worked carefully, wrapping the hip and upper leg to reduce movement, using towels to pad and support the joint. Her hands remembered old lessons. Pressure without panic, support without forcing. Let the injured body know it is not alone. Rex panted, eyes half closed, but he stayed still. Ethan watched every movement with the intensity of a man watching someone handle the last piece of his world. You've done this before, he said quietly. Chloe did not answer immediately. I've helped injured working dogs before. Military? Sometimes. His gaze sharpened, but he did not push. That, too, told her something. Ethan understood the mercy of unasked questions. Linda had disappeared behind the desk, speaking urgently into the phone. Dr. Milton hovered near the hall, rubbing one hand over his tired face. Chloe, he said softly, you know I can't authorize medication for a dog. I know, and you know this could become very ugly. It already is. He looked at Rex, then Ethan, then Linda on the phone. His shoulders sank. I'll call the vet clinic and see if they can send someone here. Linda spun around. Alan. Doctor. Milton's frown deepened. For once, exhaustion turned into backbone. I'm making a phone call, Linda, not performing surgery on a Labrador with a chainsaw. The drunk man near the vending machine muttered. I'd watched that show, and Mrs. Ross hissed. Hush. Under other skies, people might have laughed. Here, the room simply breathed. A man arrived from the administrative hallway 5 minutes later, and the temperature of the room seemed to drop with him. Richard Hayes, the evening operations manager, was 54, tall, polished, and silver-haired, with a narrow face, expensive glasses, and the careful smile of a man who had learned to appear reasonable while never surrendering control. His suit jacket was charcoal, his tie dark red, and his shoes shone as though emergencies were things that happened to other people's floors. Richard had risen through hospital administration by speaking softly in meetings and making sure blame always landed elsewhere. He was not a doctor, not a nurse, not a healer of any kind, but he moved through Riverside Memorial as if compassion were a department under his supervision. "What exactly is happening here?" he asked. Linda answered before anyone else could. "Nurse Bennett is treating an animal in the ER after being directly instructed to stop." Richard looked at Chloe crouched beside Rex. "Is that accurate?" Chloe kept one hand on the dog's shoulder. "I stabilized an injured military working dog so he can survive transport or receive appropriate care. This facility does not treat animals. This facility treats emergencies." Richard's smile thinned. "Careful, Nurse Bennett." Ethan rose slowly to his feet. He was not as tall as Richard, but grief gave him a presence that height could not. "Sir, I'm asking for temporary help. Rex served this country. He's earned better than being left on the floor." Richard's eyes moved over Ethan's jacket, the scars on his hands, the dog on the blanket, the watching staff. Chloe could almost see the calculation behind his expression. Public sympathy, liability exposure, chain of command, paperwork. Not once did his eyes soften when they landed on Rex. "Mr. Walker, Ethan Walker. Mr. Walker, I respect your service. However, we must protect our patients, our staff, and this institution." "From a wounded dog?" Ethan asked. Richard ignored the question. "Nurse Bennett, stand up and step away." Chloe did not move. A tremor of fear passed through her then, small but real. She thought of rent due in 9 days, her old car with its failing heater, the nursing license she had rebuilt her life around, the quiet apartment where she sometimes woke at 3 a.m. because a helicopter had passed overhead in a dream. She could not afford to lose this job. She knew that. But she also knew that there are moments when a person sees the shape of their soul more clearly than their future. Rex breathed under her hand. Each breath, a rough little battle. Ethan stood beside him with the helpless dignity of a man trying not to beg twice. Chloe thought of every time she had wished someone had acted sooner. Every time someone had waited for permission while pain grew teeth. She stood, but she did not step away. "No," she said. The word was not loud. It did not need to be. Richard blinked, as if she had spoken in a language he did not recognize. Linda's mouth opened slightly. Tanya looked down at the desk, her expression both terrified and proud. "Excuse me?" Richard said. Chloe's heart hammered, but her voice remained steady. "I said no. I will not leave him untreated on this floor." Richard's face hardened completely. "Then you leave me no choice." He turned to Linda. "Call security." Ethan stepped forward. "This is insane." Chloe touched his arm lightly, stopping him. "Don't." He looked at her, furious and wounded. "They can't do this to you." "They can. Because of Rex? Because I chose." That quieted him. Rex lifted his head weakly, as if hearing his name inside the silence. Chloe crouched again and pressed her palm gently to the dog's neck. "Stay with him," she told Ethan. "Keep him still. Don't let anyone drag him." "Chloe?" Ethan said, though he had known her name for less than 10 minutes. There was something heartbreaking in the way he said it, as if gratitude and guilt had become one word. 2 security officers entered from the side hallway. The first was a heavy-set man in his 40s named Carl Jensen, with a shaved head, kind brown eyes, and the uncomfortable expression of someone who hated this part of his job. The second was younger, lanky and nervous, a red-haired guard named Peter Miles, who kept glancing at Rex like the dog might suddenly stand and file a complaint. Carl cleared his throat. "Nurse Bennett, Mr. Hayes says we need to escort you out." Chloe unclipped her badge, her fingers paused on it. That little rectangle of plastic held her name, her title, her access, her proof that she belonged somewhere. She had worked hard for it. Harder than anyone in that lobby knew. She handed it to Richard. "The wrap will hold for a short while," she said to Ethan. "If his breathing changes, if his gums go pale, if he becomes unresponsive, shout until someone listens." Richard took the badge. "You are suspended pending termination review." Linda said nothing, but something like satisfaction flickered across her face and vanished. Chloe wondered what kind of fear made people mistake obedience for goodness. Then she walked toward the doors with Carl and Peter beside her. The cold outside struck her like judgment. Rain had softened to mist, silver under the parking lot lights. Chloe stood beneath the hospital awning in her scrubs, arms folded against the wind, and for a moment she felt absurdly small. No badge, no coat, no plan. Just the echo of Rex's cry in her bones. Through the glass doors behind her, she could see movement around the lobby. People returning to their roles because institutions are very good at swallowing disruption. Her throat tightened. She thought she might cry then, not from regret, but from the sudden loneliness that follows a brave act when applause does not come and consequences do. Her mother used to say courage was glorious. Her father, who had served 22 years as an army medic before cancer made him thin as paper, had corrected her once at the kitchen table. "No," he had said, smiling sadly at young Chloe. "Courage is usually just fear with its boots on." Chloe looked down at her soaked shoes. "Well, Dad," she whispered. "The boots are wet." The small joke steadied her. She breathed in the cold mountain air. Then she heard engines. 3 vehicles turned into the emergency entrance lane in a tight, deliberate formation. 2 black SUVs and a dark military transport with no hospital markings. They moved too smoothly to be a coincidence, too urgently to be routine. Chloe straightened. Doors opened almost at once. Men and women stepped out wearing field uniforms and rain-dark jackets, their movements controlled, eyes scanning. At their center was a man in his mid-40s with close-cropped black hair threaded with gray at the temples, a square jaw, deep brown skin, and a presence that made the air organize itself around him. Colonel Marcus Reed. Chloe did not know his name yet, but she knew the type. Command lived in his posture, not as arrogance, but as burden. His face was handsome in a severe way, marked by a thin scar near his chin and eyes that had learned to measure danger without wasting motion. He saw Chloe under the awning, saw her scrubs, saw the empty place where her badge had been, and stopped. "Are you the nurse who touched the dog?" he asked. Chloe held his gaze. "I'm the nurse who helped him." Something moved across his face, brief and unreadable. "Good." He turned to one of his officers, a compact woman with sharp eyes and dark hair braided tightly down her back. "Find Walker and Rex now." Then Colonel Reed looked back at Chloe. "You're coming with us." Chloe almost laughed, because the night had become so strange that being ordered back into the hospital by the military, after being thrown out by administration, felt less like reality than a parable with poor scheduling. "I was just fired." Reed's expression did not change. "Not by anyone who matters to me." He walked toward the doors, and the automatic glass opened before him as if even the building had decided not to argue. Chloe stood for one heartbeat more, rain touching her face, her future uncertain, her fear still wearing wet boots. Then she followed him back inside. The automatic doors of Riverside Memorial Hospital slid open once again, but this time nobody noticed the rain outside. Every eye in the emergency lobby was fixed on Colonel Marcus Reed. The change in atmosphere was immediate, almost physical. Moments earlier, Richard Hayes had stood at the center of the room with all the confidence of a man who believed authority belonged to him. Now that confidence seemed less certain, not gone, just shaken. Marcus Reed walked through the lobby without hurrying. People often mistook calm for softness. Marcus had spent 23 years proving otherwise. At 46, he carried himself with the controlled discipline of someone who had spent most of his adult life making decisions that determined whether people lived or died. His dark uniform jacket was wet from rain. Silver strands threaded through his black hair near the temples. A narrow scar ran along the underside of his jaw, barely visible unless the light caught it. Behind him came 4 military personnel. The first was Captain Elena Torres, a 38-year-old military physician with sharp cheekbones, dark brown skin, and intelligent eyes that missed very little. She wore her dark hair in a tight braid and moved with the confidence of someone who had performed surgery in places where electricity was considered a luxury. Beside her walked Sergeant Ryan Cole, a broad-shouldered communications specialist in his early 30s. Ryan had a square face, sandy blonde hair cropped close to his scalp, and the relaxed posture of a man who seemed easygoing until someone threatened the people under his protection. The remaining 2 soldiers spread through the lobby almost automatically, not aggressively, professionally, the way experienced personnel secured a space without making a scene. Marcus stopped beside Ethan and Rex. For several seconds he said nothing. His eyes moved across the dog's injuries, the wrapped hip, the blood, the rapid breathing, the exhaustion. Then he crouched beside Rex. The German shepherd's ears twitched. Even through the pain, recognition appeared in his eyes. "Easy, partner," Marcus said quietly. Rex's tail moved once against the floor, just once. But it was enough. Ethan released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Thank God," he whispered. Marcus stood. "Status." Captain Torres knelt immediately beside Rex. Her examination was swift and precise. Unlike most people in the room, she clearly knew exactly what she was looking at. Severe hip displacement, she said. Soft tissue trauma. Pain level extremely high. She looked toward Chloe. You wrapped this? Yes. Torres nodded once. The gesture lasted less than a second, but it carried professional respect. You did good work. Chloe felt something inside her relax, not because she needed praise, but because Rex had needed help, and someone qualified had confirmed she had helped rather than harmed. Richard Hayes finally stepped forward. His smile returned, the carefully rehearsed administrator smile. Colonel Reed, he began, we appreciate your concern, but Riverside Memorial is not authorized to provide veterinary services. Marcus turned his head, only his head. Nothing else moved. The effect was remarkable. Richard suddenly looked like a man who wished he had chosen different words. We're aware of that, Marcus said. His voice was calm, dangerously calm. The question is why a military working dog was denied emergency stabilization while suffering obvious trauma. Richard folded his hands. Hospital policy. Marcus nodded. Interesting. The single word seemed to make Richard more uncomfortable than an argument would have. Captain Torres stood. Colonel. Marcus looked toward her. He requires imaging, immediately. Agreed. Richard stepped forward again. I don't think you understand. Marcus interrupted him. No, the word wasn't loud, but it ended the sentence. I understand perfectly. Silence spread through the lobby. Even Linda Parker remained quiet. Marcus glanced toward Chloe. You're Chloe Bennett? Yes. You were terminated tonight? Apparently. Several nurses exchanged nervous glances. Marcus studied her for a moment, long enough to notice details, the steady posture, the absence of self-pity, the way she remained focused on Rex rather than herself. Interesting. Very interesting. Before he could say more, Ethan suddenly spoke. His voice sounded different, tighter, less controlled. Sir, Marcus turned. Ethan was staring toward the entrance, not outside, toward the parking lot beyond the glass. His expression had changed. Fear, real fear, the kind soldiers rarely showed. Marcus noticed immediately. What is it? Ethan hesitated, then pointed. My truck. Everyone followed his gaze. The truck sat beneath a parking lot light. Rain reflected off the damaged body panels. Even from inside, the impact damage was visible. The rear section looked crushed. Marcus stared at it. His expression hardened. When did this happen? 40 minutes ago. You report it? No. Why not? Ethan looked down at Rex. Because I was trying to save him. Marcus remained silent. A dangerous silence. Then he looked toward Ryan Cole. Photograph everything. Ryan immediately headed outside. No questions asked. Marcus returned his attention to Ethan. Tell me exactly what happened. Ethan swallowed. His face looked older suddenly. More tired, the lobby faded away in his mind. The memories returned. The road, the headlights, the impact, the sound, the fear. We were driving into Cedar Falls. Coming from where? Fort Mason Training Range. Marcus frowned. That wasn't close. What were you doing there? Ethan hesitated. Too long, Marcus noticed. So did Chloe. Something wasn't being said, something important. Ethan finally answered. Meeting someone. Who? Another pause. Not here. Marcus held his gaze, then surprisingly let it go. For now. Ethan nodded gratefully. The conversation shifted. But Chloe noticed the tension. Marcus had noticed it too. Neither man trusted the answer. Captain Torres suddenly turned from Rex. We're losing time. Agreed. Marcus looked toward Richard. Prepare imaging. Richard actually laughed, a short, nervous sound. I'm afraid that's impossible. Marcus stared at him. Impossible? We cannot use hospital equipment on an animal. Marcus reached into his pocket. He removed a small black phone, pressed a button, waited. When the person answered, he spoke only 6 words. Please connect me to Denver. Then he handed the phone to Richard. Someone wants to discuss policy. Richard frowned. What? Marcus didn't answer. Richard reluctantly accepted the phone. The expression on his face changed after approximately 15 seconds. First confusion, then surprise, then concern, then outright fear. Several staff members watched openly. Whatever conversation was happening was clearly important. Richard's face grew paler, his shoulders lowered, the confidence disappeared. When the call ended, he handed the phone back, slowly, very slowly. Marcus placed it in his pocket. Do we still have a policy problem? Richard swallowed. No. Good. Marcus turned. Let's move the dog. For the first time all night, nobody argued. Not Linda, not Richard, not anyone. As staff rushed to prepare a room, Chloe noticed something strange. A woman stood near the far end of the lobby. She hadn't been there earlier, at least Chloe didn't think so. The woman appeared to be in her early 60s, tall, elegant. Silver hair, dark overcoat. She stood completely still, watching. Not the dog. Not Ethan. Not Marcus. Watching Chloe. The feeling lasted only a moment. Then the woman turned and disappeared through the hallway leading toward administration. Odd. Very odd. Before Chloe could think more about it, Marcus stepped beside her. "Walk with me." She blinked. "What? You heard me." The military team began moving Rex toward imaging. Ethan followed. Captain Torres walked beside the transport gurney. The lobby gradually returned to motion. But Chloe and Marcus remained where they were. Marcus folded his arms. "You have military medical training, not a question, a statement." Chloe felt her stomach tighten. Most people never noticed. Most people couldn't tell. Marcus clearly could. A little. Marcus almost smiled. "A little? You wrapped that injury in under 3 minutes. You approached a military working dog correctly. You identified a hip displacement immediately. You stayed calm after being fired." His eyes narrowed slightly. "That's not civilian ER training." Chloe looked away. Memories stirred. Sandstorms. Helicopters. Blood. Names she hadn't spoken aloud in years. "I used to work with military medical teams." Marcus waited. When she didn't continue, he respected the silence. That surprised her. Most people pushed. Marcus didn't. Instead, he changed direction. "You regret helping him?" He nodded toward Rex. "No." The answer came instantly. Marcus nodded. "Good." For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Marcus looked through the glass toward the damaged truck. "There are parts of this story you don't know." Chloe followed his gaze. Neither of them noticed Ethan watching from the corridor. Watching both of them. Watching with growing concern. Because Ethan knew something nobody else in that hospital knew. The crash had not been random. And the meeting he had attended before arriving at Riverside Memorial had not been random either. Someone had known where he would be. Someone had known Rex would be with him. And if that someone was willing to ram a vehicle carrying a military working dog, what else were they willing to do? As Rex disappeared into the imaging corridor and thunder rolled faintly across the Colorado mountains outside, Ethan felt a cold certainty settle into his chest. The night was only beginning, and whatever had started on that dark road was now inside the hospital with them. The imaging wing of Riverside Memorial Hospital was unusually quiet. Outside, rain continued to fall against the windows, but inside, another kind of storm was gathering. Chloe Bennett stood beside the imaging monitor, with her arms folded tightly across her chest, while Captain Elena Torres reviewed Rex's scans. The bright white light of the display illuminated the room, casting sharp shadows across tired faces. The German Shepherd lay sedated on a reinforced transport table. Even unconscious, Rex looked imposing. His black and tan coat was scarred in several places. Thin white lines crossed his ribs and shoulders, evidence of injuries earned years earlier. One long scar ran beneath his left foreleg, disappearing into his fur, the kind of scar that came from something violent, the kind that never happened to ordinary dogs. Captain Torres studied the images carefully. "There," she pointed at the screen. "The hip is dislocated but not shattered." Ethan Walker visibly relaxed. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, hope entered his face. The expression transformed him. He still looked exhausted but less defeated. "Can you fix it?" he asked. Torres nodded. "We can reduce the joint. If there aren't additional complications." Chloe released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Good. At least Rex had a chance. The military doctor continued studying the scans. Then her expression changed, only slightly. But Chloe noticed. Something had caught her attention. Torres zoomed in on another image. A different area, the left side of Rex's rib cage. "What is it?" Marcus asked. The colonel had entered quietly several minutes earlier. He stood near the rear wall with the posture of someone who never completely relaxed. Captain Torres pointed toward a darkened section beneath the rib line. "Old trauma." Ethan immediately looked away. Marcus noticed. So did Chloe. Torres continued. "This wasn't from tonight." "No." Ethan's answer came quickly. Too quickly. The room grew quiet. Marcus crossed his arms. "Tell me." Ethan stared at Rex for several seconds. The silence stretched. Finally he nodded. 16 months ago, nobody interrupted. The veteran rubbed a hand across his jaw, a habit Chloe had started recognizing. He did it whenever difficult memories surfaced. "We were operating in northern Syria. Rex and I were attached to a special reconnaissance team." Marcus already knew this, but he allowed Ethan to continue. The story clearly mattered. A supply route had been compromised. We were tracking explosives. Ethan's voice became distant, not weaker, farther away, as if part of him had stepped backward into the memory. We found the device. Too late, the room remained silent. Ethan looked down. Rex detected it. He warned us, but we were already too close. A muscle moved in his jaw. The blast happened anyway. Chloe could almost see the memory unfolding. Dust, fire, chaos. The kind of moment that separated lives into before and after. Rex shielded me. Ethan swallowed. He took most of it. Nobody spoke. Even Marcus looked away briefly. Because everyone in that room understood exactly what that meant. Dogs didn't understand politics. They didn't understand wars. They only understood loyalty. And sometimes they paid for it. Captain Torres returned her attention to the scans. That explains the scar. It doesn't explain this. Again, she pointed toward the monitor. The room focused. What? Marcus asked. Torres enlarged another section. The image sharpened. Metal. A small metallic object, embedded near old scar tissue. Marcus stepped closer. So fragment. Torres nodded. Shrapnel. Ethan frowned. That was never there. It is now. Torres tapped the screen. Someone missed it. Marcus's eyes narrowed. No. The answer came from Chloe. Everyone looked toward her. She stepped closer to the monitor. Studied the image, thought. Then shook her head. It wasn't missed. Torres raised an eyebrow. You sure? Chloe nodded slowly. Look at the position. The fragment shifted. It moved. Marcus stared at the image. Then understanding appeared. The crash, the impact, the force. Enough to move old metal. Enough to create new damage. Enough to threaten Rex's life. The room became very quiet, because suddenly the accident looked even less accidental, and far more dangerous. Before anyone could continue, a knock sounded at the door. A nurse stepped inside. Not Tanya, someone new. The woman appeared to be around 40, medium height, short auburn hair, kind eyes, slightly nervous expression. Her name badge read Melissa Grant. Melissa worked in cardiac observation. She was known throughout Riverside Memorial as one of the gentlest nurses in the building. Patients loved her. Administrators often overlooked her because she rarely caused problems. She hesitated. Sorry. Dr. Milton asked me to find Colonel Reed. Marcus turned. What happened? Melissa swallowed. We admitted someone. Chest pain. Possible cardiac event. Marcus waited. The nurse looked uncomfortable. He's asking for military personnel. Now Marcus paid attention. Name? Melissa checked her chart. Daniel Brooks. The reaction was immediate. Ethan froze. Marcus's eyes sharpened. Captain Torres stopped typing. Even Ryan Cole, standing near the doorway, looked up. Chloe noticed everything and understood almost nothing. Who was Daniel Brooks, and why had everyone suddenly become tense? Marcus looked toward Ethan. You know him? Ethan nodded slowly. Unfortunately, the answer carried weight. Marcus turned toward Melissa. Where is he? Observation room 4. Is he stable? For now. Marcus glanced toward Chloe, then toward Ethan. A decision formed. We're going. The group moved through the hospital corridors quickly. Riverside Memorial felt different now. Less like a hospital. More like the center of something larger. Something hidden. Something dangerous. Observation room 4 sat at the far end of the cardiac wing. Inside, Daniel Brooks looked nothing like the powerful figure Chloe expected. He looked terrified. The man was 45 years old. Thin, pale, with sharp features that had become gaunt from stress. Dark hair threaded with premature gray, wire-rimmed glasses, nervous hands. His suit jacket hung loosely on his frame, as though he had lost weight recently. A lot of weight. When Marcus entered, Daniel immediately sat upright. Relief flooded his face. They got here! The words escaped before he could stop them. Marcus closed the door. Who? Daniel looked at Ethan. Then Rex's empty transport leash hanging from Ethan's hand. Then Chloe. He seemed to realize he was surrounded by strangers. His confidence vanished. Maybe I shouldn't. You should. Marcus's voice remained calm. Start talking. Daniel took a shaky breath. His eyes looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. Like a man who had spent too many nights expecting bad news. I worked for Titan Defense Systems. Chloe recognized the company, one of the largest defense contractors in the country. Daniel continued. Financial Analysis Division. 8 years. Marcus remained silent, listening. Daniel rubbed his forehead. I discovered discrepancies. What kind? Procurement. That single word changed everything. Even Chloe could feel it. Procurement scandals and military contracts were never small. Too much money, too many people, too many incentives, Daniel continued. It started with K9 equipment. Ethan's face darkened. Daniel noticed. "You already know." "I suspected." Daniel nodded, then looked toward Chloe for the first time. "You don't know what's happening, do you?" "No." Daniel laughed softly, not because anything was funny, because fear sometimes disguised itself as humor. "I wish I didn't either." The room remained quiet. Daniel swallowed, then continued. "Military working dog protective gear, body armor, transport equipment, specialized field kits, everything." Marcus folded his arms, and Daniel's hands trembled. The numbers didn't match. "What numbers?" "The testing reports." His breathing quickened. Melissa, still standing nearby, glanced toward the monitor, concerned. Daniel forced himself to continue. "Equipment rated to survive certain impacts, certain explosive forces, certain ballistic threats." But the actual performance reports showed something different. Chloe felt her stomach tighten. Daniel looked at Ethan. "The vest Rex wore 16 months ago, silence, was defective." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The words settled over the room like falling ash. Ethan's face lost all expression, which somehow looked worse than anger. Daniel continued. "The armor failed. The report was altered. The replacement specifications were altered. The testing documents were altered." Chloe stared at him. "You're saying somebody knew?" Daniel laughed again. The sound held no joy. "They didn't just know. They approved it." Marcus looked dangerous suddenly. Not physically, professionally. The way powerful people became dangerous when certainty replaced suspicion. Names. Daniel looked toward the door, toward the hallway, toward the windows, like a man expecting someone to appear. "They're connected." "Who?" "The contractors. The procurement officers. The oversight reviewers." Marcus stepped closer. "Names." Daniel closed his eyes, then opened them, and finally said the one name that made Ethan's face change completely. "Victor Kane." Nobody spoke, not immediately, because everyone except Chloe knew exactly who Victor Kane was. Former defense executive, current government consultant, public hero, political donor, powerful, connected, protected, and apparently involved in something much darker. Chloe looked between them. "Who is Victor Kane?" Ethan answered. His voice sounded colder than she had ever heard it. "The man responsible for putting defective gear on military dogs." The room fell silent again. Outside the hospital, thunder rolled across the Colorado mountains, far away, but getting closer, and for the first time, Chloe realized that Rex's injury was only the surface of the story. Beneath it lay something much larger, a hidden network, millions of dollars, corrupted contracts, powerful people, and somewhere inside all of it, the reason someone had tried to stop Ethan Walker before he reached Riverside Memorial Hospital. The rain had finally stopped outside Riverside Memorial Hospital, but nobody inside felt any relief. Storms did not always arrive from the sky. Sometimes they arrived in documents, sometimes they arrived in memories, and sometimes they arrived in the form of a frightened man carrying enough evidence to destroy careers. The cardiac observation room felt smaller now. Daniel Brooks sat upright on the hospital bed, staring at the folder resting on his lap. The folder looked ordinary, thin, unremarkable. A simple dark blue document case with worn corners and a broken plastic clasp, yet everyone in the room understood it contained something dangerous. Not weapons, not explosives, truth. And truth frightened powerful people far more than bullets ever could. Colonel Marcus Reed stood beside the window, reviewing several printed pages, while Captain Elena Torres remained nearby, occasionally glancing at her recovering patient in the imaging department. Ethan Walker sat quietly in a chair against the wall. He hadn't spoken much since Daniel mentioned Victor Kane. The name had awakened old anger, old guilt, old questions. Questions Ethan had spent more than a year trying to answer. Chloe noticed it. She noticed many things. That was one reason she had survived both military medicine and emergency nursing. People revealed themselves through small details, and Ethan was revealing something. Not fear, determination. The kind that became dangerous when pushed too far. Daniel rubbed his trembling hands together. "I copied everything." His voice sounded tired, exhausted. The exhaustion of a man who had spent months looking over his shoulder. Marcus looked up. "Everything?" Daniel nodded. "Financial records, internal communications, equipment testing reports, approval signatures." His eyes moved toward Ethan, everything connected to Rex. The room fell silent. Marcus continued reading. Each page seemed to make his expression darker. Finally, he lowered the documents. This wasn't negligence. Nobody answered, because everyone already knew. Marcus tossed several pages onto the table. There are too many signatures, too many approvals, too many layers. This required coordination. Daniel nodded slowly. That's what I discovered. Titan Defense Systems wasn't acting alone, neither were the suppliers. Several contractors had worked together. Equipment specifications had been quietly downgraded. Testing procedures had been altered. Inspection reports had been modified. Millions of dollars had disappeared, all while military working dogs continued receiving gear that failed to meet required standards. Dogs like Rex. Dogs whose handlers trusted equipment designed to keep them alive. Ethan stared at the floor. His jaw tightened. 16 months earlier, he had watched Rex bleed after the Syria explosion. He had blamed himself every single day. Now he was learning that the failure might have started long before the mission, long before the blast, long before the blood. Marcus placed both hands on the table. Who else knows? Daniel hesitated, then answered. Not many. Most of the people involved don't know I copied the records. Victor Kane knows someone leaked information, but he doesn't know who. Marcus considered that carefully, then looked toward Ryan Cole. The communications specialist immediately understood. Secure backup copies, 3 locations. Ryan nodded and left the room. The military machine had begun moving, and once it started moving, it rarely stopped. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, Richard Hayes was trying very hard not to panic. The hospital administrator sat alone inside his office. The blinds were closed. The lights were off. Only a desk lamp illuminated the room. Richard looked older than he had 2 hours earlier, much older. The confident smile was gone. The polished administrator mask had cracks. He loosened his tie, opened a desk drawer, removed a second phone. A phone nobody in the hospital knew existed. His hands shook slightly. Richard hated that. He prided himself on control. Control over conversations. Control over outcomes. Control over perception. Yet tonight control was disappearing, piece by piece. Like sand slipping through fingers, he dialed a number, waited. The call connected. A voice answered. Male, calm, cold. What happened? Richard swallowed. The voice belonged to Victor Kane. Even through a phone line, the man carried authority. Not military authority, financial authority, political authority. The authority money created. We have a problem. Victor remained silent. Richard continued. The military arrived. A pause. How much do they know? I don't know. Then find out. Richard wiped sweat from his forehead. They have Daniel Brooks. The silence became longer. Dangerously long. Finally, Victor spoke again. Leave. Richard froze. What? Leave the hospital. Now. Richard's pulse quickened. You think it's that serious? Victor's answer came immediately. Yes. The call ended. Richard stared at the phone. For several seconds, he remained completely still. Then he stood, opened a cabinet, removed a small leather briefcase, and began packing. Elsewhere inside the hospital, Chloe was beginning to notice something strange. Very strange. The silver-haired woman. The woman she had seen earlier. The woman who had disappeared near administration. Chloe spotted her again, standing at the end of a corridor. Watching. Always watching. The woman appeared to be around 62 years old. Tall and elegant. Her silver hair fell neatly to her shoulders. She wore a dark navy coat, despite being indoors. Her posture was perfect. Too perfect. Like someone who had spent decades working in environments where appearances mattered. Yet her eyes were what caught Chloe's attention. Sharp. Intelligent. Familiar somehow. As if Chloe should know her. The woman noticed Chloe watching. Instead of leaving, she approached, slowly, confidently. Chloe Bennett. Not a question, a statement. Chloe frowned. Do I know you? The woman smiled faintly. No, not personally. Her voice was smooth, educated. The voice of someone accustomed to boardrooms and briefings. My name is Evelyn Hart. She extended her hand. Chloe accepted it. Evelyn's grip was surprisingly firm. You've caused quite a stir tonight. Chloe almost laughed. That's one way to describe it. Evelyn's smile widened slightly. I prefer people who cause trouble for the right reasons. Interesting answer. Very interesting. Before Chloe could respond, Evelyn continued. You reminded me of someone. Who? A younger version of myself. Now Chloe laughed. The image seemed impossible. This elegant woman and Chloe. Not likely. Evelyn seemed amused by the reaction. Believe it or not, I was once removed from a position for refusing to stay quiet. Chloe raised an eyebrow. What position? Evelyn's smile disappeared. Department of Defense Procurement Oversight. That got her attention. Immediately. Suddenly, the pieces fit. The intelligence, the confidence, the military presence, everything. You know about Daniel. Evelyn nodded. I know quite a lot. Then her expression darkened. Unfortunately, so do some very dangerous people. At that exact moment, Colonel Reed appeared. The instant he saw Evelyn, surprise flashed across his face. The first genuine surprise Chloe had seen from him all night. Evelyn. The woman nodded. Marcus. The familiarity between them was obvious. Not friendship, something deeper. Professional respect, earned over years. Marcus folded his arms. I wasn't told you'd be here. I wasn't supposed to be. That answer somehow made perfect sense. Marcus sighed. You retired, Evelyn smiled. So did you. For the first time, Marcus actually laughed. A small laugh, but real. Chloe suddenly understood something. If Marcus Reed respected someone this much, Evelyn Hart was not ordinary, not even close. Evelyn's attention shifted. Richard Hayes. Marcus's expression immediately hardened. What about him? Check his office. Simple. Direct. Marcus didn't ask why. That alone told Chloe everything. Within minutes, Marcus, Chloe, Ryan Cole, and 2 military personnel stood outside Richard Hayes' office. The door was locked. Ryan looked toward Marcus. Marcus nodded once. The lock lasted approximately 3 seconds. The office was empty. Completely empty. The desk had been cleared. The cabinet doors hung open. The secondary computer was gone. Even several framed certificates had disappeared. Richard Hayes had fled. The realization settled heavily across the room. Ryan walked toward the desk. He's been planning. Marcus nodded. This wasn't panic. This was preparation. Chloe looked around. Something felt wrong. Not just the empty office, something else. Then she noticed. A photograph. One photograph remained, face down, half hidden beneath the desk. She picked it up. 3 men stood together beside a ribbon-cutting ceremony. One was Richard Hayes. The second was Victor Kane. The third man was unfamiliar, older, heavyset, expensive suit, cold eyes. The 3 looked comfortable together. Too comfortable. Marcus took the photo. His face darkened. Who is the third man? Chloe asked. Marcus stared at it, then answered quietly. Senator Harold Whitmore. The room became silent because everyone knew that name, one of the most powerful politicians in Washington. And now his face appeared in a photograph with Richard Hayes and Victor Kane. Ryan exhaled slowly. This just got bigger. Marcus nodded. Much bigger. Down in the imaging department, Rex finally opened his eyes. The German Shepherd blinked several times, confused, groggy, alive. Ethan was there immediately. The veteran dropped into a chair beside him. Hey, partner. Rex's ears twitched. His tail moved weakly, then stronger. The sight nearly broke Ethan, not because Rex was a dog, because Rex was family, the only family he trusted completely. Tears finally appeared. Not many, just enough. Rex lifted his head, slowly, painfully, then placed it against Ethan's arm. The gesture lasted only a few seconds, yet it said everything. We're still here. We're still fighting. We're not done. Ethan closed his eyes. For the first time in 16 months, some of the weight inside him felt lighter. Outside the room, Chloe watched quietly. Then she noticed Marcus approaching. The colonel stopped beside her. Rex will recover. She smiled. Genuinely? Yes. Relief flooded through her. Marcus studied her face, then spoke. Richard Hayes is gone. The relief vanished. What? He ran. The words confirmed everything. All the suspicions, all the questions, all the doubt. An innocent man doesn't usually flee. A guilty man often does. Chloe looked through the window toward Ethan and Rex, then back toward Marcus. So the truth is finally coming out. Marcus followed her gaze. Not yet. His voice remained calm, but it just started. And somewhere beyond Cedar Falls, driving through the darkness beneath the Colorado mountains, Richard Hayes gripped his steering wheel tightly while rainwater streaked across the windshield. He wasn't running from the hospital. He was running from the truth. The problem was that the truth had already started chasing him. 8 months later, the snow began falling over Cedar Falls. Winter had wrapped the Colorado mountains in white, softening sharp edges and hiding old scars beneath fresh layers of silence. From the large windows of the Rocky Mountain Regional Medical Center, Chloe Bennett watched snowflakes drift through the pale morning sky while sunlight reflected across distant peaks. Life looked different now. Not perfect, but different. The kind of different earned through hardship. The kind that only arrives after storms finally pass. The investigation that had started with a wounded military dog lying on the floor of Riverside Memorial Hospital had become one of the largest federal corruption cases in recent military procurement history. What began as a suspicious vehicle collision had uncovered years of fraud, years of lies, years of betrayal. The headlines had spread across the country. Federal prosecutors revealed that Titan Defense Systems and several partner contractors had knowingly supplied substandard protective equipment to military working dog units operating overseas. Internal documents showed executives altering test results. Inspection reports had been falsified. Millions of dollars intended for safety equipment had disappeared into shell companies and offshore accounts. Victor Kane's empire had collapsed faster than anyone expected. The former defense executive had spent decades building an image of patriotism, television appearances, charity events, political fundraisers, veteran support campaigns. Everything carefully designed, everything carefully controlled, and almost all of it built on deception. Federal agents arrested Kane 6 weeks after Richard Hayes attempted to flee Colorado. The arrest happened at a private estate outside Virginia. The footage appeared on every major news network. Victor Kane, once untouchable, walked from his mansion in handcuffs while cameras flashed around him. The image became symbolic, power finally answering for its actions. The investigation didn't stop there. Senator Harold Whitmore resigned before formal charges could be announced. 3 procurement officials accepted plea agreements. Multiple defense contractors lost federal contracts. Hundreds of existing equipment agreements were reviewed. Several military oversight agencies underwent complete restructuring. Most importantly, military working dog programs across the country received immediate safety upgrades, new armor, new transportation systems, new testing requirements, new accountability measures. For the first time in years, the people responsible for protecting military dogs were being forced to prove that protection actually worked. Daniel Brooks eventually testified before a federal oversight committee. The nervous financial analyst who had once arrived at Riverside Memorial clutching evidence and suffering chest pain became one of the government's most important witnesses. The transformation surprised many people. Not Chloe. She understood something others often missed. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. Daniel had been terrified from beginning to end. He simply chose to keep moving despite it. The same way Ethan had, the same way Rex had, the same way she had. Richard Hayes never made it very far. County deputies intercepted him less than 80 miles from Cedar Falls. His attempted escape generated additional charges. During questioning, investigators discovered encrypted communications linking him directly to Victor Kane's organization. The hospital administrator, who once spoke endlessly about policy and procedure, ultimately admitted that he had received financial incentives in exchange for suppressing complaints and controlling information. One of those complaints had involved Ethan Walker. Another had involved equipment reports connected to Rex. Several others had never reached public attention at all, until now. The truth emerged piece by piece, slowly, relentlessly, like sunlight melting ice. For Chloe Bennett, however, the greatest surprise came 3 months after the investigation concluded. A letter arrived, official, unexpected. The envelope contained an invitation from the Colorado Healthcare Board. Initially, she assumed it was another interview request, another statement, another follow-up. Instead, she discovered something else entirely. An official review panel had unanimously determined that her termination from Riverside Memorial Hospital had been improper. Not only improper, heroic. Those were the exact words. Heroic intervention during an emergency circumstance. The phrase embarrassed her. She never thought of herself as a hero. Heroes belonged in movies. Heroes stood on stages. Heroes gave speeches. She had simply refused to walk away. But the ruling restored her professional reputation completely. Every disciplinary action disappeared from her record. Every accusation was removed. Every concern regarding her license vanished. A month later, Rocky Mountain Regional Medical Center offered her a position. Then another. Then a third. Hospitals across Colorado suddenly wanted the nurse who had stood up to corruption. Chloe declined most of them. She wasn't interested in attention. Never had been. Eventually, she accepted a position as Director of Emergency Nursing at Rocky Mountain Regional. The role terrified her, which was one reason she accepted it. Growth often lived on the opposite side of fear. The new hospital was larger than Riverside, better funded, better staffed. The responsibilities were enormous. Yet Chloe adapted quickly. People trusted her, patients trusted her, staff trusted her. Because leadership built on service felt different from leadership built on authority. One snowy December morning, nearly 8 months after the night Rex collapsed in the ER lobby, Chloe finished reviewing schedules and stepped into the main corridor. The hospital bustled with activity. Doctors hurried between departments. Nurses pushed medication carts. Families waited near elevators. Ordinary life. Beautiful ordinary life. Then she noticed someone standing near the front entrance. A familiar figure, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark winter jacket, Ethan Walker. For a moment Chloe simply stared. The veteran smiled, a genuine smile, not the guarded expression she remembered from that chaotic night, a peaceful one. The difference was remarkable. The shadows hadn't disappeared entirely. Some never did, but they no longer controlled him. His beard was slightly longer now, his posture more relaxed, his eyes clearer. Healing had begun. Beside him sat Rex. The German Shepherd looked magnificent. His coat had regained its shine. His weight had returned. The scars remained, of course. Scars always remained. But now they looked less like wounds and more like history. Rex stood when he saw Chloe. His ears lifted immediately. The reaction brought a smile to her face. "Hey, partner," the dog's tail wagged, not wildly. Rex had always been too disciplined for that. But enough. Enough to show happiness. Ethan approached. For several seconds neither spoke. Some friendships were built through years. Others were built through surviving one unforgettable night. "Good to see you," Ethan finally said. "You too." They walked toward the hospital cafe together. Rex remained close. As always. The cafe overlooked the mountains. Snow covered everything. The landscape seemed impossibly peaceful, almost unreal considering how much had happened. Ethan sat across from Chloe. Rex settled beside his chair. For a while they simply talked. About ordinary things. Recovery, work, life, the investigation, the future. Ethan explained that he had accepted a training position at Fort Carson. No more overseas deployments. No more active operational assignments. Years earlier, he would have viewed that as surrender. Now he viewed it differently. Maybe some battles ended so others could begin. He planned to train younger handlers, share what he had learned, protect dogs like Rex before mistakes happened. The idea suited him very much. "What about Rex?" Chloe asked. Ethan smiled. The answer was obvious. Retired. Rex lifted his head at the sound of his name. He earned it. Definitely. The German Shepherd would spend the remainder of his life as a military ambassador dog, visiting schools, veteran programs, community events. Children already loved him. Adults did too, especially after the national media learned his story. Rex had become something unexpected. A symbol. Not because he was perfect, because he endured, because he survived. Because loyalty still mattered. Eventually their conversation slowed. The comfortable silence between old friends. Neither felt a need to fill it. Then Ethan reached into his jacket. He removed a small wooden box. Simple, handcrafted. The wood was dark walnut polished smooth with care. "What is this?" Ethan placed it on the table. "Open it." Chloe hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside rested a military challenge coin, beautifully crafted. One side displayed the insignia of Ethan's former unit. The other showed a German Shepherd silhouette beneath a mountain skyline. An inscription ran around the edge. "For those who choose to stay." Chloe stared silently. The meaning hit harder than she expected. She looked up. "Ethan." He shook his head. "Let me say this." His voice became quieter, more serious. "The night Rex got hurt," he paused, searching for the right words. "I was losing him." Chloe looked toward the dog. Rex watched them calmly. "I knew it. I could feel it. I've lost people before." His eyes drifted toward the snowy mountains beyond the window. "I knew what it felt like." The silence stretched. Then he continued. "And everyone was walking away, except you." Chloe lowered her eyes. Emotion tightened her throat. She hated crying in public, always had. Ethan smiled softly. "You stayed." 3 simple words, yet somehow heavier than every news report, every award, every public statement. You stayed. That was all. Not heroism, not greatness. Just staying when leaving would have been easier. Chloe closed the box carefully. Neither spoke for a moment. Then something warm touched her hand. She looked down. Rex. The German Shepherd had risen quietly, without drama, without commands, without attention. He stood beside her chair and gently rested his head against her hand. The gesture lasted only seconds, yet it said more than words ever could. "Thank you." Not for saving a dog, for seeing one, for caring, for choosing compassion when rules demanded distance. Chloe stroked the fur behind his ears. Rex closed his eyes, content, safe, home. The emotion she had been fighting finally arrived. Not sadness, something gentler, something deeper, peace. For years, Chloe had carried questions. Questions about whether small actions mattered, whether ordinary people truly changed anything, whether kindness survived in a world that often rewarded selfishness. Looking at Rex, she finally understood. One decision, one moment, one refusal to walk away. That was all it took sometimes, not to change the entire world, but to change someone's world, and sometimes that was enough. Outside, snow continued falling across the Colorado mountains. Inside, a retired military dog rested his head against the hand of a nurse who once lost her job for helping him. Neither of them knew exactly how many lives had been altered because of that choice. Neither needed to know, because the truth was already there. A single act of compassion had exposed corruption, protected future service dogs, saved careers, revealed criminals, and reminded countless people that courage often looks ordinary in the moment. Heroes rarely wear capes. Sometimes they wear hospital scrubs, and sometimes all they do is refuse to leave. Sometimes God's greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder from heaven or signs written across the sky. Sometimes they arrive through ordinary people who choose compassion when it would be easier to walk away. Chloe Bennett never set out to expose corruption, change national policies, or become a hero. She simply saw a wounded military dog lying on a hospital floor and refused to ignore his suffering. What seemed like a small act of kindness became the beginning of something far greater. Through one decision, hidden lies were exposed, justice was served, lives were protected, and countless military working dogs received the safety they deserved. In our daily lives, most of us will never uncover a federal corruption scandal or stand in the middle of a military investigation. But every day we face smaller choices that matter just as much. We choose whether to help someone who is struggling, whether to speak the truth when it is uncomfortable, whether to show kindness when nobody is watching, and whether to stand firm when doing the right thing comes with a cost. This story reminds us that God often works through ordinary people. He uses simple acts of courage, compassion, and faith to accomplish things far beyond what we can see. We may never know how one kind word, one helping hand, or one brave decision might change another person's life. But God knows, and sometimes the miracle begins the moment we choose to care. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need encouragement today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts and connect with you. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories of faith, hope, courage, and the extraordinary ways God works through ordinary people. May God bless you and your family with peace in difficult times, strength when you feel weary, wisdom when you face hard decisions, and hope for every new day ahead. May He watch over your loved ones, guide your steps, and fill your heart with His comfort and grace.